So when the Republicans take the majority, is it just going to be about stopping spending and going back to regular order and helping inflation? I want them to do all those things. But how about our own investigations? How about actually taking a page from the Democrats' playbook? Joining us right now from the state of Maryland, Congressman Andy Harris, who is on the House Oversight Committee, which, well, by definition, would conduct many investigations into how the government is running. Isn't that right, Congressman?
Well, I'm on the Appropriations Committee, which, of course, has oversight in every area of spending, and I hope that we do have oversight hearings in our committee next year, and I think we will.
So let's start with a couple of the topics that I think a lot of Republicans, listen, voters out there need a reason to get off the sofa, get out there and vote. I keep hearing from every candidate that I talk to, turnout is the most important thing, Republican turnout. So let's give them a taste of what they might get in terms of investigations. We've seen this January 6th hearing going on. No real Republican representation on that hearing, absolutely unprecedented. And there's a lot of issues that they're ignoring. For instance, Congressman Harris, will we ever have a hearing about what happened with regard to the police presence and security at the Capitol that day?
Well, I hope we do. I don't think we're going to conduct hearings the way they do, which is to exclude the other party, which is essentially what they did on the January 6th committee. That would be great in North Korea or communist China or Russia, but this is the United States. So, we'll make sure to include Democrats. Now, it's not going to be a majority of Democrats, and they'll get their own witness or two. But we are going to look into the question of what went wrong on January 6th with regards to refusing the offer of National Guard troops, for instance, which was a key decision made by the Democratic leadership. And we're going to have to find out what the truth is about that.
And while we're finding out the truth about some things that affected all Americans, I would argue, perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong, that maybe COVID-19 and what came out of that Wuhan Lab actually affected more Americans' lives over the last couple of years than the events of January 6th. And yet we still haven't had a legitimate hearing investigating the truth about where this virus came from. There's plenty of data out there. There's plenty of facts. Should that be a priority for this new House?
Well, I think the House and the Senate should be investigating that. I think it's going to become clear very shortly that this did come from the Wuhan Lab. It was probably an accidental release, but we also have to dig into why the United States was funding gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Lab, which is basically run by the Chinese military, as almost everything in China is. To add fuel to the fire, the most recent news that we're sending another $600,000 to EcoHealth Alliance, which is going to do essentially the same thing, this time maybe not in China, but in other Far Eastern countries.
Well, and to that end, Congressman Harris, I mean, I think you're right. I think it did come from the lab. Whether it was accidental or not, we should find out. But the official word from the Chinese government out of Beijing is they're still sticking with this bat soup thing and the wet market. They knew, I remember Secretary of State Mike Pompeo at the time said that they were withholding information in the middle of this pandemic. They are not our friends, they're not our partners, and yet we're treating them like they are.
Yeah, and that has to stop. This administration is coddling the communist Chinese. There's no question about it. Again, in my mind, no question this came out of the Wuhan Lab. The cover-up by the Chinese. What else do you expect from a communist totalitarian regime? They're going to make it up as they go along. Their people are not going to reject that. It's up to the rest of the world to reject that propaganda. And again, with people like Anthony Fauci and Dr. Burks and others, the bottom line is they swallowed it hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah. You mentioned Anthony Fauci. Let's move on to the good doctor, because I think that a lot of Americans have questions about the highest paid government employee, makes more than the president does. And over the last couple of years, since COVID-19, since the pandemic, a lot of Americans are hurting, God knows. A lot of Americans lost their jobs, either because the business went bankrupt or out of business because of all of the shutdowns, or they lost their job because of a vaccine mandate. Fauci hasn't lost his job. In fact, he's gotten richer during this entire time by the tunes of several millions of dollars. He's a government employee, Congressman. Doesn't that deserve some investigation?
Well, look, the bottom line is when he retires, his pension income is going to be higher than 98% of Americans' annual income. The bottom line is that no one should be getting rich on government service. It's supposed to be public service, but apparently some people do. And it looks like Dr. Fauci and his wife, both of whom are federal government employees, are certainly taking advantage of it.
Well, and again, other people were victimized by his decisions, his advice to both presidents. We've already heard from Dr. Burks when she said, yeah, we knew this vaccine wasn't going to prevent infection, and yet that's exactly what the American people were sold. And there are people who have lost their jobs. There's still people in the military who are about to get discharged because they won't get that vaccine because it's been mandated. Shouldn't we trace the paper trail on those things, Congressman?
That's absolutely true. And one of the things we have to do is we have to reinstate all the members of our military who were thrown out because they refused to get a vaccine. A lot of them just asking either a medical or religious exemption or just asking to be given an antibody test before they are required to take a vaccine. I don't understand what's going on in the Department of Defense. They want to do woke social justice programs rather than defend our country. And in this case, they clearly made the wrong call. We've also fired our first responders. We've fired teachers. We've fired nurses. Again, with no real scientific reason behind it, and it's about time we make them right.
Congressman Harris, one upside, I guess, of the pandemic and children forced to learn at their desktops with laptops is that parents got very motivated in their government schools. They went to school board meetings. They made some noise. That's what democracy looks like, I'm told, when the left goes and protests and makes noise. But we saw a remarkable Orwellian spectacle last year with the Department of Justice opening up an FBI squad, a team, to investigate certain parents at school board meetings as potential domestic terrorists. There's a paper trail now that looks like it touches the Biden White House and this school board association, and this was sort of a setup. Does that deserve an investigation to find out if the DOJ is being used as a political arm of the Biden White House?
Absolutely. We don't have the information on the DOJ and FBI programs investigating Antifa and Black Lives Matter, which resulted actually in actual violence when the left protests. Now, these are parents who, again, they saw what was going on during COVID because they had a peek into the classroom when it was online, and they didn't like what they saw. And again, we are going to have to find out, what was there collusion? Well, we know there was collusion between the CDC and the teachers union. Was there collusion with the Department of Education? Is the Secretary of Education involved in this? Is the CDC director involved in this? Our students have suffered so much in learning loss because of COVID. And again, the Democrats just want to whistle past the graveyard on this. They don't want to hear anything about it. They don't want to hear any criticisms of it. And then they attempted to make monkeypox the next pandemic, but of course that fizzled because we know how monkeypox is spread. It's not spread by coughing.
Yeah, it's not going to affect our school children. Let's hope, at least, although the way their curriculum is going. Congressman Harris, your district in Maryland is actually very close to the District of Columbia, and I know that you care deeply about what's going on in D.C. The violent crime right now has reached a point where Americans from all over the country, they're afraid to come to the federal Capitol to actually discuss and petition issues with their elected representatives. That's a constitutional problem. Is there a role for Congress to oversee how the District of Columbia is actually running their affairs?
Oh, my gosh, there actually is. It's plain reading of the Constitution. The Constitution gives Congress the oversight over the District of Columbia. They're more concerned about whether or not they can smoke recreational marijuana than they are about violent crime in the District of Columbia. They have their priorities all wrong. And there's a growing movement among my Republican colleagues to rein in some of the home rule that we gave the District of Columbia because they're acting irresponsibly with the home rule, and it is the Capitol. I mean, when you have tourists coming and 2 blocks from the Capitol, the beautiful Capitol building, you have a virtual tent city of homeless. Something's not right with the way that city's run.
Well, I'm glad your colleagues see it that way, and they can also take up this ridiculous idea that they've got in D.C. about allowing illegal immigrants to vote in non-federal elections. Add that to the list. Congressman Harris, thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
More to come on O'Connor Tonight.